Strange to think someone had successfully lied to him. Our buddy Jinchi is no mean tactician himself. He used the old doctor. In other words, the quack. Maomao knew Jinchi had been making nice with the physician recently. She wondered how he had used him. He explained to the old doctor what was going on with you and let him let the old fart know. You know, he told him indirectly. Maomao went quiet. That really was a good idea. Also, the old doctor this and the old fart that seemed like it could get confusing. The quack doctor was a pudgy middle-aged man, but in zoological terms he was sort of in the same category as mice or squirrels. He occupied roughly the same place in the hierarchy as Basin's duck. Once things have quieted down, we need to show up in a hurry or the old fart will start to smell something fishy. Maomao looked at her palm. It was still visibly marred from making the pesticide. What do we do about this? She asked. I have a little change of clothes for you, Chu said, promptly producing them. Just tell everyone something went a bit wrong, you know. You've already got all that stuff on your left arm, Lehaku said, gesturing at the offending appendage. It was covered in scars from Maomao using herself as a test subject for her medicines. She had never specifically mentioned it, but apparently he had figured it out. Come to think of it, as overprotective as the freak strategist could seem, he had never once objected to her being a food taster, checking for poison. He would instantly put the screws to anyone who threatened to harm Maomao in the slightest way. But maybe he chose not to interfere when it came to threats Maomao chose for herself. She wondered if Lehaku had one of his instinctive reads on that aspect of the strategist. Good point, she said. She figured he was right. No one would question a minor injury to her hands at this point. All right, shall we go home? So she put the devastated village behind her. Chapter 20 Confirmation. When she got back to the western capital, she found it in a bad state. Things really were worse here, she thought. She surveyed the city with a sense of detachment. There were still grasshoppers on the roads and crawling along the walls of buildings. Sometimes she saw black clumps squirming, but she chose not to look too closely. She suspected the actual number of grasshoppers was less than it had been in the village, but she could see chewed-up street stalls and gnawed fruit on the ground everywhere. City folk do not cope well with insects. The people here had probably reacted to the swarm very differently than the villagers. She saw hardly anyone outside. The farmers had their crops to think of, so they tried to exterminate the bugs to keep the plants safe. But simple fear ruled the inhabitants of the western capital. How bad was the chaos? She asked Lehaku, who was sitting on the driver's bench. Rikusen had said he would stay in the village for a few more days. That was all well and good for the villagers. However, Maomao was surprised that he didn't feel he should return to the western capital to deal with this emergency. It was bedlam, rain and hail. Didn't anyone warn them the swarm was coming? If Jinchi had managed to send word even to her, he must have had some plan in place in the capital. Lehaku, however, said, "This is the western capital. There's an order to things, you know." I see. Jinchi could hardly run through the streets shouting at the top of his lungs. Unlike Maomao, he had his position to think of. He could do nothing unless he did it through the officials here in the city. Looks like he did better than nothing, though, Lehaku said. In a large town square, there was what appeared to be a food distribution taking place. Maomao was surprised. Had the bugs really caused that much damage and exhaustion? It had been several days, though. Not every household had extensive provisions on hand. A lot of poor families were living hand-to-mouth to begin with. Often it was the best they could do to earn a day's wage, then spend it at a stall for dinner that night. A handful of places to eat were still open, but in the chaos, distribution networks had dried up. They did not have much to serve. Maomao could smell the congee being passed out even from where she was. The smell made her think of Lahan's brother. It smelled like sweet potatoes, maybe from the huge supply that had come with her and the others on the ships. The potatoes were being cooked and served to fill the bellies of the starving townsfolk. So they are using up the potatoes on this distribution, Maomao observed. Oh, Lahan's brother, we hardly knew you. It hurts so much to lose him, Chu said. Her eyes brimmed with tears. She was treating him like he was dead. I'd say if they are coming in useful, that's fine, isn't it? I'm sure Potato Guy is out there somewhere, smiling, said Lehaku. Out there, where would that be? It was hard to tell if Lehaku thought Lahan's brother was alive or dead from the way he talked. The carriage arrived at the annex. People gathered at the gate when they heard the horses whinnying. Specifically, the people were the Quack and Tianyu. Young lady, you're back. An exhausted-looking, haggard man raced up to Maomao. Lehaku grabbed him by the scruff of the neck before he could collide with her. The little guy struggled and flailed. It was the Quack doctor. Master physician, are you all right? Maomao said with a bow. Lihaku put the quack back on the ground. What about you, young lady? You're all right, aren't you? I know you were somewhere safe, but you must have been so scared. I certainly was. I would have sworn the world was coming to an end. Yes, sir, I know you faint at the sight of a cockroach. He'd come to her white as a sheet more than once, after encountering a particularly vicious bug while cleaning. A swarm of grasshoppers must have been a living hell for him. It's not fair, Nying. Why did you get to evacuate? It must be great having real connections. Tianyu was as full of sarcasm as ever, although Maomao wasn't sure how far he actually believed what Jinchi had said. Are you sure it's all right to leave the medical office empty? Maomao asked. That was truly and sincerely the first thing on her mind when she saw them. Ah, we're not that busy, Tianyu said. Maybe because we're mostly supposed to take care of the Moon Prince. Dr. Yu and the others now, they have a lot to do. The two of them have time on their hands because they're in charge of Jinchi. Something about that seemed strange. That reminds me, young lady, Master Lacan was so very worried about you. Oh, that was not especially useful information. He seems to have quite a sweet tooth. You should take some mashed sweet potato treats and go say hello to him. He was very hungry for them the other day. She wished she could ignore the good doctor's suggestion, but if she did, she suspected the other party would visit her instead. Anyway, she had a bigger problem. The doctor was taking advantage of Lahan's brother's absence to cook their seed potatoes. Gracious, young lady, you're hurt. What in the world happened to your hand? Oh, it's nothing to worry about. I was making pesticide. It's from experiments with that. Experiments? You're not an insect, young lady. The doctor looked genuinely perplexed. If it can kill a cat, it'll work for sure on a bug, Tianyu interjected. All right, you two, that's enough chatter, Chu said as she came into the room. We have lots we want to tell you. Tell us, the doctor said, about this bug-killing concoction. Ah, yes, of course. Sorry. The doctor politely made way. Tianyu didn't look like he was going to be a problem. He'd only shown up to make smart remarks. Many important people, not just Jayukyuan, lived in excessively large houses, but Jinchi's chambers were located in the innermost sanctum of this one. That was all very respectful to him as a guest, but frankly it was a real hike. All right, nobody's clothes are rumpled. Excellent, Chu said, inspecting Maomao's and Lihaku's outfits. Maomao saw a stray hair or two on Chu's head, so she patted it down. Excuse me, Wihi, Maomao said, but she was interrupted by a tremendous crash the moment they entered. Jinchi was sitting in a somewhat less than formal posture. Suhen and Taomei attended him as usual, while Gaoshan and Basin were there too, both looking a bit uncomfortable. Quack, quacked the duck next to them. Would it be better to say something quippy about the bird or not? Basin had left the duck behind, and she had returned with Maomao and the others. The way she'd gone straight back to Basin the moment they'd arrived at the annex, she was more like a dog than a duck. Seems like Gaoshan's sort of thing, Maomao thought. Contrary to appearances, he had a soft spot for sweet treats and small animals. He probably found the duck's presence healing. Okay, he couldn't spend all his time looking at the duck. She glanced at Lihaku to ask how they would handle the report. He took a half step back, apparently wanting her to do the talking. Chu likewise retreated. We've just returned, sir, Maomao said, standing a little straighter and talking a little more properly because Taomei was there. If it were just Gaoshan or Suyan, that would be one thing. Very good, Jinchi said with an air of detached authority. He seemed to feel the same way as Maomao because his face wore his proverbial Moon Prince mask. Taomei had been one of Jinchi's nursemaids, Maomao gathered, but her approach to child rearing had been rather different from Suyan's. And how was it? He asked. A fair question, but about all Maomao could do was repeat what she had heard from Chu. The harvest was severely impacted, but not annihilated. As far as the wheat goes, we think there's about 70% of a normal year's harvest left. Then Lahan's brother's message reached you in time. He even calls him that in official meetings. Maybe even Jinchi didn't know the man's name. If he never came back, Maomao wondered what they would put on his tombstone. We dispatched messengers to the other villages, but by all accounts, we saved less than half the harvest. And there are some places the messengers haven't come back from yet. I can only assume things are worse there. As hard as he had worked, Lahan's brother simply couldn't reach everyone in time. Worse, no matter how much he had endured for the sake of the villages he did reach, the rest would simply assume the higher-ups had ignored and abandoned them. Struggle as he might, Lahan's brother was never going to reach the finish line. Lihaku, how many people do you think we need to send to each village? Jinchi asked. I'd say at least 10, sir. We'll need some to take care of the bugs and some to help rebuild the houses, but the thing that worries me most is... Violence or brigandage? Both, really. Natural disasters like this turned life upside down for people, and that tended to do the same to the human heart. A ravaged heart could soon turn to thievery or violence. Jinchi was already thinking about what came after the grasshoppers. Poink went Chu's unruly hair. She seemed to think Jinchi might ask her opinion, but she never got a turn to talk. Very well, you've done good work, Lihaku. You can return to your post, Jinchi said. Sir, Lihaku replied smartly and left the room. The duck, for reasons unknown, followed him. Her rump quivered as she went. Maybe she needed to poop. Can ducks be housebroken? Maomao would have assumed that was impossible, but then again, if the animal desecrated Jinchi's chambers, Taomei was apt to roast her on the spot. Maybe the duck, sensing mortal danger, had decided to go outside. If so, it was an impressive trick. Maomao turned to follow them, but immediately found Suyan blocking her exit. Can I help you? Maomao asked. Ho ho ho, perhaps you'd spare us just a little more of your time. When she put it that way, Maomao had no choice but to do an about face. Jinchi was no longer wearing his moon prince expression. Is your head all right? He asked. Basin must have told him about the piece of hail and Maomao's subsequent unconsciousness. When she looked closely, she could see dark bags under Jinchi's eyes and his lips were dry. I'm not sure, sir. Sometimes a person drops dead a few days after being hit on the head. Even if there were no external wounds, bleeding inside the head could still cause death, apparently. Then you need to be lying down. No, sir, my time will come when it comes. The only person who could do anything about it would be my father. That was him or perhaps Dr. Liu, but neither was here in the Western capital. So I would prefer to do what I can while I can. Explain that right hand then. He seemed to have noticed Maomao's bandages. Scars from an experiment, she said slowly. I thought you didn't use your dominant hand for that. He gave her a long, hard look. It was the reverse of their usual positions. At length he said, HRM. Well, fine. More importantly, you are all right. That is what matters. Oh, she saw how his hand clenched and unclenched and realized the moon prince had reverted entirely to Jinchi. It was almost childlike and indeed distressingly human. You must be tired. You should return to your room and get some rest. Now that Maomao was grateful to hear. Chu threw her hands in the air in celebration, until she saw the look on her mother-in-law's face and put them down again. Maomao was eager to go back to her room, but there was one thing she needed to know. Master Jinchi, are you not doing anything about the swarm yourself? It might not sound like a very respectful question, and it wouldn't help that she'd slipped back to calling him Jinchi instead of Moon Prince. But after all his planning and preparation for how to deal with the plague of insects, surely he shouldn't be lounging in his guest suite right now. Maomao pressed the point. In these unprecedented times, surely there is much that you could still be doing, sir. Her point seemed to get across. As you know, I am a guest here, Jinchi said, returning to his official tone. What I can personally do on the ground is limited. So I prepared a gift for those who can do whatever they wish. Maomao recalled the sweet potato congee being distributed in the marketplace. She said, I saw sweet potato congee being passed out. Good to know they are using it as intended. Using it? Jinchi had already given the provisions to the Western capital. The capital's ruler would get the goodwill for handing them out. The townspeople's gratitude would be directed toward whoever had given them the food. He has plucked this moment right out of Jinchi's hands. Jinchi had done all the work, but Jayaku-o would get all the credit. It is also clear enough why they allowed me to send messengers to the villages at my will. If nothing happened, they would get to blame the imperial younger brother for trying to stir the people up. And if something did happen, the Western capital would still be seen to have sent word. Jinchi was a far more straightforward person than he looked at first glance. He put the nation first, without regard for faction or alliance. He could be a terribly useful pawn if someone knew how to play him. Then this convenient catastrophe arrived. These Westerners seemed to have planned all along to use us central visitors as their errand boys and girls. We were at least saved from the worst of it, because the honored strategist took the fore. But there were people who found this more painful than Maomao. Basin remained resolutely expressionless, while Suyan and Taomei looked less than cheerful. Gershun, meanwhile, was nursing a very deep furrow in his brow. This seems to be the true reason I was summoned here to serve as a convenient foil, Jinchi said. Astoundingly, the interim ruler of the Western capital, Jayaku-o, was trying to use the imperial younger brother as his own supporting actor. Is he trying to make himself the hero of this story? Maomao clenched her fist as she realized what was going on. They were going to be in the Western capital for a while. Jayaku-o might have been Empress Jayakai's brother, But even so, Maomao had the feeling she was never going to learn to like him very much. Jinchi seemed to keep drawing the short straw and couldn't hide his mounting exhaustion from those closest to him. He needed to get some sleep, and soon. Maomao was just about to try to bring an end to the conversation when Sugen called Basin, "Your duck is making a racket outside." "Jofu, is something wrong? That masked owl is back." Maybe returning it to the wild wasn't so easy. "It's used to humans now," Taomei said, breaking into a smile at the mention of the owl. Maomao was sure now that Taomei appreciated the bird as a fellow predator. "Do you think you could go take a look? You know how to handle that thing, don't you?" Sugen said. "When you put it that way, I suppose masterpiece of a woman though she might have been, even Taomei had to give in to a veteran lady in waiting like Sugen." Basin, worried about his duck, hurried outside too. It was already dark, so Chu lit a lantern. Sweet smell of honey floated through the air. "Miss Chu, perhaps you would help me with dinner preparations," Sugen said. "Oh yes, certainly," Chu replied somehow theatrically. Sugen gave Maomao a wink. "I get it, real nice." Without prompting, Gaeshun trotted out after them. He would be nearby so he could come quickly if he were needed. Once the two of them were alone in the room, Maomao took a deep breath, then heaved a sigh. "Master Jinchi, yes, don't you think you're pushing yourself too hard?" The last vestiges of the Moon Prince vanished. "Is there ever a time when I'm not?" From the moment he had been born a member of the imperial family, freedom had not been a word in his vocabulary. Maomao realized she had simply asked the obvious. How much more too hard can you push yourself then? There had to be a limit to how much Jinchi could take. You ask tough questions. We don't know where the limit is until we find it, do we? Most people who ruin themselves beyond repair do it at work, while continually swearing they can keep going. That left Jinchi quiet for a moment, but his face darkened. "Isn't that what an apothecary is for, to make people better?" "Yes, sir, more or less. Shall I prepare an herbal bath for you?" No, Jinchi held out his hand. Maomao stared at it, trying to decide if it had some significance. His hand was large, the fingers long. The nails were neatly clipped and filed. The large hand stretched a little farther and placed itself on Maomao's head. Yikes, he mussed her hair as if he were petting a dog. She tried to slap him away, but he dodged her nimbly. "What the hell, sir?" she asked, patting her dishevelled hair back into place. She hadn't had a chance to bathe for several days, so it felt thick and greasy. "I simply made myself better, so I wouldn't reach my limit so soon." Jinchi held his head high as if to say he hadn't done anything wrong. "There must be better ways to do that, sir. Is that an invitation to utilize these ways?" Neither of them said anything. Maomao backed away a half step and crossed her arms. "Tell me about these better, okay? I've reported everything I have to report, if you'll excuse me." And then with an artful dodge, Maomao ducked out of the room. Outside, she let out a long breath. He has been so indirect lately that I had forgotten. Jinchi's true personality was to charge ahead. His methods could be brutal. If he had been showing restraint with Maomao, it was only because of the ridiculous way he had decided to go about this. Walking around in hopes of clearing her head, Maomao found an owl, a duck, Basin, and for some reason even a goat running around outside. That goat belongs to Miss Chu. They were turning this annex into a farm. They have the freedom to do that. The scene was simultaneously ridiculous and amusing. Maomao felt the edges of her mouth creep upward, and she clenched her fist, vowing to make more pesticide tomorrow. She was going to be in the western capital for a while yet. If she was going to tell Jinchi not to push himself too hard, then she should take her own advice. But still, she would do everything she could. She had to. Epilogue: aromatic tea and baked snacks with plenty of butter. A moderately stimulating incense that drew out the richest notes of the sweet smell. Empress Jayukayu hosted, and her guests came to be entertained. She had held many tea parties during her days in the rear palace, but fewer since she had gone from consort to empress. She was confident, however, that her ability to coddle a visitor had not diminished. "Thank you ever so much for inviting us," one of the women said. These women were the wives of some of the most important people in Li. They were all older than Jayukayu, with one exception, her niece Yakin. "And who might this be?" a sharp-eyed guest asked upon spotting her. "My niece," Jayukayu replied with a smile. "She has joined us all the way from the western capital." Yakin had still not entered the rear palace, as both Jayukayu and Jayukyun had objected to her doing so. Jayukayu's father and her brother wanted different things. This realization made her even less hesitant to act. She had introduced the girl not as Jayuku-o's daughter, but as her niece. Nobody would know Jayuku-o as the governor of the far-off western reaches. He was known in the capital as Jayukyun's son, and little more. Anyway, Yakin resembled Gyokyu more than she did Gyokyo. No doubt people would conclude that she was Gyokyu's niece on her mother's side. They talked about the most popular perfumes, imported velvet, and the newest makeup. These subjects were a bit juvenile considering the age bracket of the attendees.